Warm greetings to you all, dear participants and the speaker. Uh, you're welcome to the webinar, 12th session of the webinar series on the course called Ambedkar and the Agenda for Nation Building, a virtual training course offered by Professor P.D. Satyapal Kumar sir from the Department of Anthropology, Andhra University. This course is hosted by the International Institute of Anthropological Applications, a virtual institute of Anthropological Association for Humankind. And I now request Professor P.D. Satyapal Kumar sir to deliver his lecture.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pedrataya, and good evening, friends. Welcome you to the topic number 12 in our course on Ambedkar and Agenda for National Building. Today, I'll be speaking on the topic of Ambedkar on human rights, and with special emphasis on the distinction between cultural relativism versus ethical relativism. So, I planned this kind of this today's talk with a general introduction of what's human rights, and then we will also talk about what human rights, in fact, now is how it is couched in the discipline of anthropology. Then I'll talk about, in fact, Indian society and the issue of human rights. Then let's go to Ambedkar's take on the cultural relativism, and then I'll try to explain different facets of Ambedkar's efforts as an harbinger of human rights. Then I will move on to formulating a theory of human rights, Ambedkar's theory of human rights, actually. So this being the task for today, let us have a brief intro about the human rights, actually. We know that human rights are rights which are held inherent to all human beings, regardless of gender, nationality, residence, say, or ethnicity, religion, color, or other kinds of categorization which divides people. The roots of this sort of an understanding of universal human rights has been an extension, in fact, of classic Western thinking, beginning with Greek philosophy, then Roman law, Judeo-Christian tradition, Reformation humanism, and then Enlightenment philosophy in Euro-American kind of traditions. Especially after World War II and after the devastation and the disastrous results, in fact, there has been a kind of a huddle looking at the colossal human tragedy that took place, that a drafting of universal human rights took place with the United Nations. They came up with the Declaration of Human Rights way back in 1946. And if we look into that kind of a thing, actually, such sort of declarations, in fact, now have a kind of a history way back. Generally, it is taught that Magna Carta in the 13th century, the kind of an agreement between the king and the barons, is considered as the first ever human rights kind of a effort, but it's very, very conscripted, actually, because it was just an understanding between the king and the barons, not with the common citizens. So looking at that view, maybe like in the sense the perfect human right kind of a thing, or human dignity, or the capacity of human beings, that sort of an understanding and proclamation, we can take it back to 563 BC with Buddha's Kalama Sutta. Probably we can have an understanding about it later. But the point is, we have seen Magna Carta, then there were, in fact, now French Revolution, and then United States Declaration of Rights. You have Declaration of Rights of Man, both in fact now, like in a sense, France and also German kind of a peasant revolts, and later on there are some kind of a covenants which came up. So with this sort of kind of different histories and different compulsions, we have seen several kind of agreements, understanding, and covenants which came up with a kind of a mutual agreement as to how human status and dignity need to be protected and need to be upheld. So if you look into these things, these human rights are norms basically that aspire to protect all people everywhere from severe political, legal, and social abuses. The philosophy of human rights addresses the questions about the existence of human beings, the content, nature, universality, and justification of these rights, and legal status of the human rights actually. So human rights are considered as non-discriminatory, meaning that all human beings are entitled to them, and no one can be excluded from them actually. So yeah, there were proclamations saying that these rights are considered as sacred, inviolable, and express a sentiment of kind of an entitlement, and which has thoroughly shaped the idea of justice itself. However, there is much dispute over what counts as a right, where they come from, and what moral weight we are to credit them. Much of this dispute has originated from the transition from natural rights to a human rights framework. Natural rights, of course, we know many of the philosophers, of course, including the existentialist John Locke, who talked about natural rights, in fact, now as divine rights bestowed upon human beings. And from that perspective, we try to, in fact, now look into the kind of a human rights perspective, detaching the religion from this kind of a thing, and understanding human rights as more of a civil, political, social, and economic and cultural rights. So the transition itself, in fact, now caused some kind of a say uncertainties and some kind of a gaps actually. Of course, while all human beings are entitled to human rights, not all human beings experience them equally throughout the world. Many societies, governments, and individuals ignore human rights and grossly exploit other human beings. Many societies adhere to their cultural traditions, and hence we have such kind of a predicament. So, drawing into anthropology on the issue of human rights, anthropologists initially were a little skeptical about entering into or endorsing the kind of a universal declaration of human rights. When such a thing came in 1946, the American Anthropological Association, under the chairmanship of Melville, like this is Melville Herskowitz, they came up with a statement on Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1947, in which they said, uh, I quote, standards and values are relative to culture from which they derive. Rejection also comes from a belief that individual rights and this discourse, it is Western of origin and therefore ethnocentric. So they were like anthropologists, in fact, now were saying that one cannot have a broad, like an all-encompassing universal human rights. They were premising upon the cultural relativistic approach, which was very much in force there. They say that one you cannot have common rights for everyone, and they were critical, saying that this sort of a discourse is mostly of a Euro-American tradition, and that is now being imposed upon the non-Western societies. And the cultural relativists, we know, they believe human rights should take account the cultural differences. The values are defined by local culture as opposed to the global ideology. And cultural relativism, as you know, friends, claims that there is ethically, morally, and culturally no absolute truth, and that when observing other culture, one must suspend all judgments. We know this is, in fact, no culture theory. The concept of cultural relativism came up, say, like dealing the ethnocentrism, which of course, like in a sense, kind of a judging other societies on the standards of our own society. So the cultural relativism, which has been proposed by French Boys, wants to take away all such kind of things and then understand and value cultures from the perspective of the followers actually. So therefore, this particular position of anthropologists made anthropologists quite, say, skeptical about universal human rights and such kind of a declaration. Not all anthropologists embrace this idea. In fact, some major players in the field of anthropology, such as Ralph Linton, Robert Redfield, Alfred Kroeber, Clyde Clochon, they were all critical of, say, cultural relativism. Clochon was writing in 1950s because almost after 30 years, 35 years of cultural relativist arguments, he was writing saying that what's happening to relativism in anthropology today? Here, my analysis proceeds from an assumption of committed anthropology of scholars working with a sense of ethics, of right and wrong, or good and evil. So Clochon goes on saying that this committed anthropology has disrupted the relativist notions inherited from the 1920s and 30s. So this sort of a disbelief or some sort of a critique on cultural relativism has been much more, in fact, now pronouncedly voiced during 1980s. And this approach, like in a sense, uh, it really puts anthropologists in a situation of quandary. I just want to give a small example, actually, the very current example of today. In the daily newspaper Hindu, I was reading in an international column today where there is a meeting between the foreign external affairs minister Jaishankar from India with Anthony Blinken. Blinken, in fact, is a foreign secretary of US. So both were talking about the issues of democracy and human rights. Blinken was saying, I quote, that uh, both countries, we are striving from a more perfect union. This is a project for both of us. And he says we must continue to hold ourselves, both of us, as well as our fellow democracies, to our core values, including respect for universal human rights and like freedom of religion and belief and freedom of expression, which makes our democracies stronger, unquote. So here Antony Blinken was premising upon the universal, say, human rights and universal human freedoms, actually, to which Indian counterpart Jaishankar said, approach to I quote, approach to democracy and human rights is country specific. He is saying that each country approaches the set of issues from their own history, traditions, and societal context. Our yardstick for judgment are the integrity of the democratic processes and the respectability and credibility that we command among our population, unquote. So this is, in fact, now clearly exemplifies what the cultural relativism means, actually. When the American counterpart, for their own reason, of course, this is a kind of a political engagement which I'm talking about, but whatever be the case, when there is a kind of a reference to universal, say, human rights, universal human freedoms, immediately, in fact, no, you have this kind of a say the local cultures and premising local cultures, taking a cultural relativist opinion came up, saying that we have our own understanding of what we mean by rights and what we understand by our own kind of a like safeguarding them. So this is a critical aspect which came in, and anthropologists, in fact, many of them, they have stressed upon abandoning this cultural relativist position because it is creating a kind of a problematic. Anthropologists like Nash, like in a sense, and Hatch in 1989 claims that relativism is flawed in its call for human beings to be non-judgmental in the face of human atrocities. And he says that relativism, of course, he says that relativism should not be thrown away altogether, but we must premise, in fact, now understand the limitations of this particular concept. Especially in 1990s, there were questions asked by many anthropologists like Turner, Jesenter, Freeman, Ronaldo Resetto. Many of them, in fact, now they are questioning, saying that do we support and tolerate inhuman practices in the name of cultural relativism, institutional discriminations such as slavery, racism, caste, bodily mutilations, harsh ordeals, etc. So, do we have to tolerate and then allow them to happen just as a kind of a mute, unbiased spectator? And Renato Resoldo asks, in the academic debate, calling someone a relativist, it has become a mild form of verbal abuse. He was trying to critique actually the relativist position. In fact, no, is a kind of a non-committal, and then in fact, no, like say head in the sand ostrich kind of a approach. So yes, Jesender was writing in 1998 a paper in Journal of Anthropological Research. The title is "In the Name of Culture: Cultural Relativism and the Abuse of the Individual." And many of such things, in fact, now has happened. Many anthropologists, they were highly critical of this cultural relativist position. And Freeman says in 2011, radical cultural relativism gives too much potential for abuse, with those in power able to dictate what determines culture to hide abuses of power and causing, in fact, no, say, uh, a very deep violation of human rights to fellow members of these societies. So then came up, in fact, now as a kind of a panacea, an argument called, in the place of cultural relativism, there need to be ethical relativism. uh, this sort of ethical relativism also, in fact, no, yeah, it comes as a replacement, but it is a replacement, not completely. In fact, no, it does uh, uh, solve the issue actually. Ethical relativism is a theory that holds that morality is relative to the norms of one's culture. That is, whether an action is right or wrong depends on the moral norms of the society in which it is practiced. The same action may be morally right in one society and wrong in another society. So, how to go about with this actually? So then came up, in fact, no, some understand is called as moral relativism. So then there is a growing, in fact, understanding that certain universally accepted morality and notion of rights are imperative in a highly globalized world. Why? Because no more the argument that societies, in fact, no, have been untouched by the any kind of an influence. So almost all societies are exposed to the forces of say like in a sense economy, forces of, in fact, no, sovereignty, and then other kinds of, in fact, no, like influences. So therefore we don't have societies completely claiming that, in fact, no, it is our kind of a way to doing things, but there is almost an alarming necessity for understanding of certain commonly held moral notions to be followed and then say upheld. So in this kind of argument, we need to look into human rights and dignity. See, human dignity, in fact, no, is the outcome of uh, the practice of human rights. We know pretty well that the ideas of human dignity is very much integral to the human rights discourse. It is standardly used in two ways: to refer a normative status of a person that makes their treatment in terms of human rights a proper response. Two, a social condition of persons in which their human rights are fulfilled. So one is, like in a sense, the entitlement or endowment of an individual to be like in a sense treated in a dignified way, and second is the societal conditions which allow such kind of a practice of human dignity. So in this kind of a discourse, we see two kinds of dignities. One is called as status dignity, another is called as condition dignity. Status dignity says that human rights are based on status dignity that all beings possess equally. So this is what, the famous yeah, like in a sense legal luminary John Rawls. John Rawls talks about, in fact, no circumstances of human dignity, and he also talks about circumstances of justice. So that leads us to the conditioned dignity. See, saying that human beings are agents with capabilities of prudential, moral reasoning, imagination, knowledge, productive labor, and social cooperation. We can identify various kinds of social conditions in which human dignity is fostered. So, human dignity always, like in the sense, it goes beyond simple human rights discourse. Uh, these conditions, in fact, now of justice, they go to not just human rights but humane aspects of say society. So, so this being the couching us, these two, human rights and human dignity and anthropology, let us look into the society of India and Ambedkar's take on cultural relativism. Actually, friends, cultural relativism challenges the universality of principle of human rights and justifies those cultural variations, and they say that it should be protected from the legitimate exemption under international human rights law, irrespective of it leading to many human rights violations. So, in Indian context, this argument of cultural relativism is invoked many times to justify religious laws violating basic notions of human rights like caste system, untouchability, sati, child marriage, patriarchy, just because it aligns with the moral codes of Indian people and their society. So, this idea goes against the very definition of human rights, which exists by virtue of being a human. Ambedkar, particularly, held that a relativist position could undermine the movement of human rights as it prevents a society from criticizing its own culture and hence limits the possibility of social reforms, reformulations in removing the ills of the society. So Ambedkar was thoroughly critical of that particular thing. He says that you cannot have encapsulated kind of a society where others, in fact, are disqualified to reason the nature of life, and also, in fact, no, the kind of a humanity that it's being justified or treated up. So therefore, Ambedkar says, with regard to certain things, he says that I will pull up these people before the bar of the world. This is a warning that he is giving to the perpetrators of human rights violations in India, propelled by, in fact, now like institutional as aspects by religion and custom. So he was trying to, like in a sense, go beyond that restrictive cultural relativist positions actually. Now, friends, we will go a little more specific as to what exactly Ambedkar has done on the aspects of human rights in India. See, the idea of human rights generally is considered as a refined outcome of the political democracy in the West that we have talked about. But what Ambedkar has done is he has not only nativized this concept of human rights and dignity, but also brought to the roots of human values in Indian soil, like Kalama Sutta of Buddha, way back in 563 BC. And Ambedkar strived hard to apply them for the transformation of an unjust social system in India. The Buddha, in fact, no, like in a sense, were talking to common people of the villages when they asked him as to whom should they believe, because there have been different kinds of discourses propagated, and what is right, what is truth, what is factual, and what is perfect, kind of a situation. There, the Kalama Sutta, in fact, talks about Buddha's proposition of like having a kind of a human rights and dignity. He says that as a rational being, every human being, in fact, is capacitated to test the information that he has got. You right to verify, right to examine, right to criticize, right to hold an opinion, right to in fact enhance those things. So he was talking about all these things, saying that each human being has inherently this kind of a capacity, and therefore they form the kind of a right of a human being actually. So that is the area where Ambedkar was talking about. Like that's the reason why he says, "I have not borrowed democracy from the French Revolution." He says, "Let no one think that I have borrowed these ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity from the French Revolution." He was saying that I have borrowed them from my master Lord Buddha and the cultural moorings of this country. That's what he was talking about actually. So Ambedkar's incisive analysis of Brahminical system has exposed the cultural politics and tyranny by which teeming millions of Indians have been subjected to systemic exclusion of human rights. Ambedkar's exhumation of Brahminical ideology and social order brought to the light the intensity of social, economic, political, and religious oppression, thus relegating uh, people to subhuman existence. So he started with, in fact, now the institutionalized aspect of caste system. Let us see how what he has done in here. Ambedkar is the first social scientist to find out several facets of dehumanization in the caste system, powered through the engine of religion. Before Ambedkar, several attempts were made to paint caste only as a social aberration. But Ambedkar, in fact, now has clearly demonstrated that the caste system is the denial of right to existential dignity, which leads to denial of other rights to the majority population of this society. So he says that the majority population, in fact, now have by being relegated to uh, the subhuman kind of an existence, he says that the system itself, it goes against the very existential dignity, the right to existential dignity, right to become equal human being is denied over here actually, and that flows into other kinds of denials. He pretty well talks about three important kind of a denial of rights. One is denial of right to identity, denial of choice of occupation, and the denial of right to claim our resources. So here we see the denial of right to identity. Ambedkar says that all the identities, whether they are in fact no Avarna, like say they are Anarya, Dasa, Dasya, whether Shudra, Ati Shudra, like the names of the castes, and even inhuman, like in a sense, identities of supplication, like surnames and all. Ambedkar says that they are all insulting identities, heaped upon by the majority population, by those perpetrators of, in fact, no inequality. So there is no right to, in fact, identify oneself. Majority population, in fact, no, they don't have the freedom to identify themselves. They don't have the right to identify them. So therefore, denial of right to identity has been there. And second right, he says that denial of right to choice of occupation, because we know the one of the major characteristics of Varna caste system is the hereditary occupation actually. So there is no choice. You are bound to, in fact, no, because you are born in a particular group, you are bound to take up that occupation, whether you like it or not. Or even if you abandon that particular traditional occupation, you are still identified, in fact, no, with the kind of a label. So third important thing Dr. Ambedkar talks about is the denial of right to claim our resources. This is exactly what we have seen, in fact, now as a kind of enforced poverty that the caste system talks about. We have seen in the cultural capital now, in which we talked about caste and economic exploitation, basically. So, friends, the denial of right over resources, it excludes the majority from the ownership of resources, the control over resources, even the access to the resources, basic resources as well. So Ambedkar exposed the social suppression of the system of caste that denies interaction with other human beings on equal plane. So he was first to show caste as economic exploitation. He terms the ideological foundation of the system based on the gospel of slavery, resulting enforced poverty, and leading minority enjoying the divine sanction of this spiritual fascism. So he pointedly rebuked the subordination of women as a religious dictum. He says that equality, not just between man and man, but should be between man and women as well. So taking the system by its horns, Ambedkar waged relentless struggles against this diabolical contrivance. Debunking the divine origins of caste, Ambedkar said, caste is a device designed to divide, actually. That's the kind of a thing he explains and does, he proves, with a lot of, kind of an evidence. Then he goes on with the direct action, actually. Ambedkar was on the field. He was not simply postulating as a philosopher. He was a pragmatic philosopher. So he started stirring up the consciousness of the common people to go against those kind of violations of human rights in the name of the engine of religion, actually. Ambedkar assumed the extraterritorialization of the whole communities and their castigation as being outside the pale of humanity. He says that awareness, like in the sense, you are not within the pale of kind of a equal human being. And the kind of an enculturation that happens in this kind of a system, Ambedkar is putting an axe on that particular thing. He's saying that you are to tell a slave that he is a slave, then he will revolt. That means in this kind of a setup, the person who is, like in a sense, denied of rights and then equal as human position doesn't understand that such a thing has been happening to him. So therefore he has to whip up that kind of a consciousness. So here Ambedkar was saying time and again, he's saying, I quote, suffering is sin. The system that spins off suffering and sustains it deserves to be broken, thundered Ambedkar. He called upon the people to free themselves of the age-old shackles and be equal human beings, where he exhorts, are you the dumb herds of animal species that can only be roused by the stroke of whips? Are you so insensitive that you suffer all insults, all ignominy, all that oppressive menace let loose by generations of so-called civilized men perpetuating this unjust social order? Can you not be free from this slavish subjection? Think of freedom, think of liberty, think of human dignity. Let us march out towards those humanistic goals, unquote. This is how, like in a sense, Ambedkar has been galvanizing the common people, the illiterate lot, the masses, towards the spirit of self-help, self-support, self-elevation, and self-emancipation. Then let us categorically see what actually he has done for different kinds of, in fact, now attainment of rights from this unjust system. The very first public activity that Ambedkar has done uh, is in 1927, where that's called as the Mahad, kind of an agitation. Mahad, in fact, no, is a place near Pune where there is a common tank called as Chaudhar tank, and that is a civil municipality tank where everybody, in fact, no, can take water. But as we know, with a kind of a so-called orthodox society like India, only few castes are allowed to take water. And of course, like in a sense, those who are ex-untouchables were never allowed even to come near that particular thing. So Ambedkar took up that particular issue. See, he wants to prove that, in fact, no, attaining right to water is right to life. This is something, in fact, no, akin to Gandhi taking up the salt satyagraha at Dandi. Gandhi want to take up an aspect that something which is very common, which is so cheap, which is widely used by all people, that is salt. He wants to prove that even salt is being taxed by the colonizers. Actually, Ambedkar went a step ahead. He was saying that, okay, fine, the colonizers are doing this, but you have these internal colonizers. They are denying even right to draw water from the commonwealths actually. So his crusade for the realization of human rights started in 1927 with the Mahatma Tank agitation, where Ambedkar exhorted, I quote, saying that it is your birthright to have food, water, and shelter in equal measure on par with every citizens of this country, unquote. So he was instilling that kind of a equal citizenship, saying that it is your birthright. But just look at yourself. You're not getting all these kind of things. You don't have right to food, right to water, and even right to shelter on par with every citizen of this society. So therefore, Mahat Satyagraha is a claim for right to water, which is right to life, also bringing to the manifold existential horrors and tragedies. So Ambedkar was showing it, in fact, no, so was like in a sense, very, very consciously. The first thing that Mahatma's tag agitation reflects upon is the inauguration of a discourse of equality in access to the satisfaction of most basic needs. For the first time in the history of Indian jurisprudence, Ambedkar brings out this particular basic need as a matter of right. This is the what you call like in a sense, genius of Ambedkar. For the first time, we know that he has been a great jurist. So he was bringing the argument of basic needs as, in fact, no matters of fundamental rights. Actually, that's how like Article 21 has come up as a fundamental right, with right to water, right to all kinds of resource and all. So the other aspect is that Ambedkar showing his submissiveness to the rule of law, because when in his first attempt, there was a kind of a like in a sense retaliation by those people, those so-called upper caste. They took direct action on the people, beat them up, and then like in a sense drove them away. Ambedkar never wanted them to retaliate. He wanted to conduct it all the way. In fact, in a peaceful way, he conducted his struggles for human rights. So he is, second time he got the injection from the court of law, and then came over there, where the second time when he got his kind of a, like in a sense, right in his hand with a kind of a court injection, he did not go there and drank water directly. He did not go there at all. He has organized a meeting where he set Manusmriti on the bonfire. So there he was saying that, in fact, now I am pegging the axe on the root of this problem. Not allowing people to draw water is only a kind of a problem, but he wants to strike at the root of the problem actually. So that is where he said, oppression life is not an exception, but the rule in this kind of Indian society. He was challenging the very foundation of the spiritual fascism. He was interrogating the organized millennial lawlessness structured through the so-called quote unquote sacred law, setting bonfire the Manusmriti. So posing, in fact, this illegality of laws, say Ambedkar was first to frontally, in fact, oppose these as illegality, and then put them as place them as problematic. And Ambedkar said, I am heralding a social revolution against all man-made disabilities that, in fact, now have been perpetrating in this society. So therefore, he was making that kind of a agitation for right to water as a kind of a social revolution against all those violations of human rights actually. So second aspect, right, is about right to religion. In 1930s, since 1930s, Ambedkar, in fact, now has gave a call for temple entry. It started with Kalaram temple at Nasik, then it went to Pune, and then other places in Maharashtra where many of these ex-untouchables, they wanted to forcefully enter into the temples. Of course, with not much, in fact, no success. But Ambedkar later asserted, it is saying that he doesn't have an ambition to make these people go to the temples. If at all allowed, they have to, in fact, say, take up the bhajans. Ambedkar says, he said, I want to, like in a sense, exhibit that these people call us Hindus. They want to call us Hindus for a political reason, but they deny us that we are equal Hindus, in fact, in the form of religion. That's what he exactly says. So in 1931, friends, Savarkar, by that time, he has got the clemency. He requested the British and got the excuse of, in fact, transferring from the Andaman cellular jail, and he was placed in house arrest in his own hometown in Ratnagiri. So when Savarkar, in fact, came to know about Ambedkar's this kind of attempt of, like in a sense, attempt to enter into a temples, 1931, Savarkar wrote a letter to Dr. Ambedkar, saying that I heard that Ambedkar, you are organizing these temple entry movements. So Savarkar was saying in that letter, there is a small temple on the hilltop in Ratnagiri, and if you come over here, Savarkar said, I want to join you in fact, making the temple open for the ex-untouchables. To that letter, Ambedkar gave a reply saying that, expressing thanks to Mr. Savarkar, says that my intention is not to make my people go into the temples and conduct these bhajans. He says that my intention is to attack the Chaturvarna system, which has caused all these kinds of, in fact, human rights violations to these people. So he says that if you want to join this struggle, if you dare enough to join this struggle, Ambedkar said you are welcome. There ends the kind of a conversation between them. So these agitations, in fact, like even challenging the restrictions imposed upon the untouchables by tied down to the Hinduism, Even when Gandhi was opposing that the ex-untouchables need to be categorized separately in the roundtable conference, as Ambedkar argued, Gandhi was saying that in fact, no, all of these people are Hindus and you cannot divide them. You can in fact, no, get your rights only over my dead body. Then Ambedkar squarely posed a question to Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi, he said, I quote, if you say that your religion is our religion, then your rights in that religion and our rights must be the same. Show me where are they? To which Gandhi doesn't have an answer actually. So then he goes to in fact now show that the surviving question is slavery justified? Ambedkar had maintained two mutually reinforcing as stances on this question. First, slavery is in principle never morally justifiable, even by the standards of earlier times, which in fact no even philosophers like Aristotle as justified, and even if it arguably justified in other periods for modes of production, Ambedkar says it is wholly unjustified now in the present times. But what if slavery finds a religious sanction? What if religion and ethic both assign moral standing to the master and the slave, united in the cosmic dharmic situation? Actually, this is what Ambedkar was questioning. To such question, Ambedkar's response was that, I quote, no true religion can justify slavery like Hinduism, which has been appropriated by the Brahminism. He was saying that Brahminism was the key for all these kind of a thing. He contends that this religion either must be reformed or abandoned through conscious acts of conversion to religions which valorize equality and dignity for all human beings. He was saying that either you have to reform. If you find it is unfit for reform, then discard it. That's the kind of a thing that he's talking about the right to religion. Then Ambedkar's move towards civic and political rights. Friends, all through his memoranda, committee representation different to the Southbury Committee in 1919, then Simon Commission 1929, then 1930-31 roundtable conferences. Ambedkar was the sole person talking about the civil and political rights. If anybody looks into the roundtable conferences, those claims of rights which people have been talking about, they're all rights based on their religious affiliation. Congress was in fact that time was acting as a representative of the Hindus. Muslim League talking about the rights to the Muslims. The the Sikhs were talking about their own rights, and Zoroastrians were talking about their own rights. Even Anglo-Indians were talking about their own rights actually as well. It was only Dr. Ambedkar during the roundtable conferences, he was talking about civic rights actually, such as adult franchise, such as political representation. He was the lone voice over there. So he was very particular on this particular thing. I do not want to dilate those aspects very clearly. If anybody wanted to know, there's a lot of in fact argument over 3 years that Ambedkar strived for these civic and political rights, and then in fact which has been scuttled when the Clement Attlee, the Prime Minister of say England, he got convinced by Ambedkar's arguments, and he has given communal kind of a representation which has been thoroughly opposed by Gandhi by his fast and to death. Later turned out to be the Pune Pact. So there were rights of representation, rights of in fact access to civil and public places actually. So Ambedkar was talking about those things. With regard to the labor rights, friends, Ambedkar, when he was the labor minister in the Viceroy Council during 1942-1945, he has brought in many important aspects of labor rights, like Minimum Wages Act. He was instrumental in bringing insurance rights, maternity leave benefits, and there is a plethora of rights which Ambedkar in fact brought in the area of labor rights. I'm not going to dilate those aspects. What today, like in a sense, many of the rights that labor enjoy today were in fact were under the stewardship of Dr. Ambedkar. Then right to gender equity. See, we know pretty well Ambedkar in fact on parallel while in the drafting committee of the Constitution, he before Constitution he has drafted states and minority, said that this is my original Constitution. At the same time, he was also drafting another important document called as the Hindu Code Bill. Ambedkar saw lot many difficulties in fact within the drafting committee of the Constitution. because he was saying that I was a sole member fighting against 292 members of the drafting committee in a very utmost hostile and adverse situations. So he knew pretty well that he could not get that kind of a right to abolish caste actually. So he wanted to do it through Hindu code bill. Hindu code bill, yes, it is envisaged for the gender equality, gender rights. Yes, by in fact no, like in a sense of giving rights to women, Ambedkar in fact no was managing to the path of destroying caste and the caste system altogether, where the major in fact no, like in a sense rights that Ambedkar talked about to women in the Hindu code bill was the right to in fact no say uh, like a choice of women. Women should have the freedom to choose a partner. And second right basically is endogamy need not be the necessary condition for a legal marriage. Earlier, in fact, now what is said, only that kind of a marriage becomes legal when the partners are from the same caste. So Ambedkar says that endogamy need not be the kind of a compulsion for a legal marriage. So he was trying to destroy the caste actually. And then Ambedkar also giving right to divorce to women, where women herself is in fact now is given a lot many disabilities. He is giving the right to women in fact now kick off a kind of a ignominious and then in fact now very troublesome kind of a marriage. And then Ambedkar in fact now was giving right to property to the woman, where woman herself is considered as a property of men, but Ambedkar was giving right to women actually. So on the parallels of in fact no say giving equal rights to the women, the Hindu code bill, if properly implemented, would lead to the destruction of the caste system actually. That was the thing that which Ambedkar said, weaning of the caste system is envisaged over there. That's the reason why Sharmila Rege, she claims that the feminist theory of Phule, Periyar, Ambedkar gives women more emancipatory force to intercept many layers of hierarchies at the time. So she argues that it is not a narrow agenda of identity politics, but on the contrary, interrogating the current feminist standpoint, which is Brahminical and is also biased by middle class values and visions. She says that it goes beyond actually. Certain of the pronouncements in the Hindu code bill and also other aspects, in fact, now of Ambedkar go in line with the today's eco-feminists. See, today eco-feminists, like in a sense, they focus on caste and gender-based oppression of women, especially the Dalit women, particularly women who are losing their livelihoods in the rural areas because of displacement and environmental destruction. It also questions the unjust distribution of natural resources, which is one of the main causes for mismanagement of natural resources. So, in a wide-ranging area, basically, Ambedkar connects the gender equality just with the caste system and also with other, in fact, now related aspects which have been, in fact, now wholly integrated. So then, of course, we'll see the Constitution of India, basically. And here, Ambedkar was bringing a lot of rights, actually, a lot of fundamental rights, directive principles of social policy, so on many other things as, in fact, no, as matters of rights, democratic rights in the Constitution. So, but there is a kind of a parity that we see, like in a sense, there are parallels. So Ambedkar Constitution, in fact, no, has been drafted during the times were end of World War II, and we know that the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights has just come actually. So Ambedkar did not lose sight of that. Many of the provisions of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights found place in the Constitution of India. Like I have in fact now counted nearly 21 rights, which in fact now are parallelly there both in United Nations Declaration of Human Rights and the Constitution of India. Like in fact, no, if you look into civil political rights in the Indian Constitution, like equality before law, which is there in Article 14, it is actually found in Article 7 in UDHR. Prohibition of discrimination, Article 7 of UDHR finds Article 15.1 in the Constitution of India. Equality to opportunity, Article 21.2 in United Nations declarations, which became Article 16.1 in the Constitution of India. Likewise, freedom of speech and expression, Article 19, also is Article 19.1b in the Constitution of India. for freedom for peaceful assembly, Article 21 in the United Nations, this thing, which is Article 19(1)(c) in the Constitution of India, actually. Likewise, yeah, protection from life and personal liberty, Article 3 in the United Nations Declaration, which became Article 23 in the Constitution of India. Like freedom of conscience and religion, Article 18 of United Nations Declaration became Article 25(1) in the Constitution of India. And then like protection from slavery and forced labor of Article 4 in the United Nations instrument, which is now in fact now is Article 23 here. So likewise, there are several things in fact now which we can do about, and specifically the social and economic cultural rights which have been there in some articles in Universal Declaration, also very much found their place in the Constitution of India. Right to work in just and a favorable condition, Article 23(2) over there, United Nations, became Article 41 in the context of India. Right to equal pay and equal work became Article 39(d) in the Indian context. And then right to just and favorable remuneration, Article 43. Right to rest and leisure, again Article 43 in Indian Constitution. Right to everyone to standard of living adequate for him and his family, Article 39(a) and also Article 47. So right to proper social order, Article 28 in United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is now Article 38 in the Constitution of India. So therefore, friends, many of the parities that we can see, at the same time, Ambedkar in fact now has managed, like in the sense a kind of a social engineering, where we pretty well see that say many of the human rights movements that Ambedkar has participated, and they could find place in the Constitution secured as democratic rights. His grand scheme of reconstruction of Indian society, friends, on the democratic foundation of liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice, fought for rights of representation as democratic rights, which of course we have dealt with there, because which are now being called as so-called reservations. They are not reservations in Ambedkar's language. They are rights of representation based on the percentage of populations, actually, of the respective groups. So he says that they are not compensations for earlier kind of a what do you call violations, but they are today's representations, actually. So therefore Article 15 and 16, which of course, like in a sense, they're intended to in fact now breach the monopoly of the so-called upper caste, entrenched caste, on their in fact no monopoly over education, employment, agriculture, industry, bureaucracy, and governance of this country. So Ambedkar in fact brought these things in fact within the couch of the Constitution of India, and realizing the absence of a civil society, Ambedkar placed great responsibility on the state by drafting Article 38 to establish and sustain a social order whereby liberty, equality, fraternity is to reach every citizen of this country. So, friends, we can go on with a lot of, in fact, interventions that Ambedkar has made in the society of India, and also with the kind of instrumentalities that he brought out both in the Constitution of India and in other areas. But now we'll turn towards Ambedkar's theory of rights. We can, in fact, like very well, like in a sense, formulate an Ambedkar's theory of human rights, actually. So, in a certain sense, friends, Ambedkar's conception of freedom. Can you mute participants, please? Dr. Govindaya, please mute yourselves. Yeah. So what I'm trying to do was talk about is Ambedkar's conception of freedom and justice. They derive from liberal vision and then tradition, actually. So liberal political kind of these things and all. Liberalism has been the fort upon which both the Western kind of a thing has been found up. The figures of human rights are preeminent in many of the texts of Ambedkar's corpus. But given the horrible context of destitution, degradation, and disadvantage systematically haunting the depressed classes, and given the context of collusive colonialism, Ambedkar innovates beyond, in fact, liberal kind of these things about justice, freedom and rights in a remarkable way. Departing fundamentally from the liberal paradigm of rights and justice, Ambedkar sought to accomplish two unusual results. His theory of rights was addressed more to the civil society than to the state. If you look into the kind of say rights, how they have been in fact now couched in the constitution, it definitely, like in a sense, he was addressing more to the civil society than to the state. Actually, the rights do not appear as constraints actually and limits on the power of the state. He wants a very strong interventionist state actually, or rather they emerge as in fact no legal entitlements, casting corresponding obligations on the members of the civil society. Rights atypically in fact Ambedkar thoughts legitimate an intervention state, which I mean talking about. He wants a state to intervene into the aspects of the society. Otherwise, what is the logic in fact now having Article 38, which will now we don't find any kind of like in a sense constitutions across the world. It is there in Article 38. It says that it is the duty of the state to promote, to strive to promote and establish a social order whereby liberty, equality, fraternity is catered to every citizen. This is most unusual for a kind of a constitution, where constitutions are seen as a kind of a guide to political governance. But here, Ambedkar places the responsibility of the government to establish a social order, to bring down an unequal social system and establish a democratic social system actually on the foundations of liberty, equality, fraternity. This is unfounded in any kind of a constitution in the world. This is the genius of Ambedkar, bringing out that kind of a responsibility, trying to create an interventionist state. A state must intervene. Like in a sense, other kind of thing, state, the government doesn't interfere into the personal affairs of the people. But Ambedkar, theory of justice, in fact, now thinks otherwise. Ambedkar essential juristic strategy was to innovate jural relations. The depressed classes have a right, and the state has a duty to eradicate, abjurate discriminatory practice in the civil society. And the state had the power, and members of civil society were under liability to have their own cultural practices redefined. So therefore, Ambedkar was in fact overhauling all those kinds of orthodox cultural traditions, saying that anything that goes against the values of liberty, equality, fraternity, and justice, he says that they're illegal. Actually, this is a thorough overhaul of an orthodox kind of a society, which has never been done, in fact, in any kind of a constitution. The whole scheme, friends, is based on philosophy of postulating a dialogue between individualism and state control. The majority communities' rights to cultural and religious freedom stand fully curtailed normatively by the enunciation of right of social equality of the repressed classes. Of course, what's happening in fact now is a different kind of a story altogether currently. But Ambedkar in fact now says these things very outrightly. Upendra Bakshi, the celebrated jurist, explains that Ambedkar precisely poses the problem of rights and basic needs. The basic needs of the Atishudras were both material and non-material. The later comprise a variety of needs for dignity and fraternity and respect for the Atishudras' right to be human, actually. The former include a whole set of material needs such as access to basic needs, for example, immunity from bodily, physical, and psychic aggression, access to public facilities, access to resources such as drinking water, and access to participation in government employment. So all these things. Animating this last identification, Russell's very distinctive theory of representation. This is what Upendra Bakshi says. A distinctive theory of representation, that is, political representation goes beyond legislative reservations and extends to reservations in administration. The bare catalogue of needs thus identified and the sustained campaign to transform the needs into rights is an astounding facet of Ambedkar's achievement in human rights. Unquote. This is what Upendra Bakshi was talking about, in fact, now Ambedkar's kind of a feat. Friends, precisely Ambedkar, in fact, now had been a precursor to some international human rights covenants, actually, even before the international covenants, in fact, now have been refined. Ambedkar was talking about certain of the aspects. I want to highlight 4 important areas where Ambedkar, in fact, now marched ahead of many of the international covenants, in fact, that we have today in his own times, actually. The first one is interdependence of human rights. See, his call for liberty, equality, fraternity, and non-discrimination. These are the core, in fact, now of his conceptual framework of human rights. The international covenants, in fact, now talked about, yes, liberty, equality, justice, all these things, in fact, now as isolated aspects of, in fact, now human rights. But Ambedkar thoroughly found the interconnectedness between these two, where he says, like in a sense of freedom without equality, in fact, no, it doesn't take you anywhere. Like, say, equality and freedom without fraternity, that leads to, in fact, no, a kind of another kind of, in fact, like in a sense of domination by few. So therefore, in his argument with regard to the interconnectedness of these kind of human rights, he finds fraternity as the cornerstone of democratic society. That was, in fact, no, the genius, original genius for Dr. Ambedkar. So, in contrast, French and American declarations, they did not talk about these things actually. But Ambedkar placed social and economic equality alongside the political and civil kind of so equality. See, many of the constitutions, in fact, they talked only about the political and civil equality. But in the Constitution of India, Ambedkar brings to the fore equally with force the social and economic, in fact, equality as a premise of, in fact, true democratic kind of a right. So this is one genius of Dr. Ambedkar, where he has become precursor. The second is the emphasis on the intersectionality of gender, caste, and class. See, until the 1970s, when Kimberly Crenshaw, she first time brought about, in fact, the triple oppression of black women, that they're oppressed basically on the name of race, they're oppressed on the name of, in fact, being poor. Second, based on the name of their sex. So where race, gender, and then, in fact, class, they intersect each other. The intersectionality, in fact, now came to the fore only in 1970s. But friends, if you look at Dr. Ambedkar and his active action right from 1930s, almost 40 years ahead, in fact, now Ambedkar was talking about the intersectionality of caste, gender, and then class. Way back in 1916, when Ambedkar published his first research paper as a master's student, he, in very first paper, Caste in India, their genesis, mechanism, and perpetuation, he was referring to the intersectionality of caste and gender in Indian society. In the origin of caste, in fact, he said, the castes have been originated based on the oppression of women, and they do maintain today based on the oppression of, continued oppression of women. This intersectionality, in fact, is, in fact, another genius of Dr. Ambedkar. He has been the forerunner in identifying this aspect, in explaining the Brahminical patriarchy and the multiple layers of patriarchy operation in Indian society. And the third aspect is protection of minorities in democracy. See, as a visionary, Ambedkar knew that democracy is not a guarantee for the protection of minorities. So he has included several measures in the states and minorities and the Constitution of India. Of course, all these protections, in fact, now have been opposed by Gandhi and other kind of his team. But it is still an area of misunderstanding or area of, in fact, gap in the international law and human rights. But Ambedkar very consciously talks about the protection of the minorities in a democracy by the kind of a something called as a constitutional morality, and then the elimination of tyranny of the majority over the minority, where he says the minorities, in fact, should not be snubbed, they must be won over actually. So the kind of a protection of minorities in democracy is not just simple religious minority. There are social minorities, linguistic minorities. He talks about many of these several facets of minorities in India, and he was being a forerunner about dealing with the relationship between minority and majority in a democratic kind of a foundation. The fourth and important aspect of administration is that Ambedkar talks about saying that, I quote, discrimination is a menace which must be guarded against if the fundamental rights are to be real rights in India, unquote. So he says that the ideas of discrimination, the thoughts of discrimination, basically, which are ingrained in the enculturation of so many, the so-called upper caste, Ambedkar says that you will have dishonest judiciary and very, very skewed and biased administration. He was saying that the judges, in fact, don't fall from heaven. The administrators, in fact, do not come from a vacuum. They are members who have been encultured in their respective cultural settings, in their respective castes, and those ideas, in fact, they will be at the back of mind when they try to deliver these things. So Ambedkar says that this sort of a discriminatory attitude and attitude which has been encultured, socialized, it must be checked. Otherwise, the fundamental rights would not be, in fact, construed as a real rights. So, friends, these are the four very important aspects that Ambedkar has brought in the realm of human rights, actually, which are very, very important. No one else, in fact, have done so far in the area of human rights. And yeah, coming to finally, friends, Ambedkar has very seriously said, rights are not protected by the law. He said that don't dream that your rights are enshrined in the constitution, your rights are enshrined in the law, they are made into a law. There is no guarantee that they will be, in fact, say, respected and then say, adopted. He says that rights are not protected by the law, but the rights are protected by the social and moral conscience of the society. This is exactly where he wants to bring about a culture of human rights in the Indian society, culture of perfect, in fact, democratic society. So he wants, in fact, like in the establishment of democratic society is more important, he says, than establishing a democratic politics, actually. So that's the reason why he says democracy is a form and method whereby a form and method of a government whereby revolutionary changes are brought about in the social and economic life of the people without bloodshed. That is what Ambedkar was envisioning. And then, of course, the summum bonum of his say the whole fight, Ambedkar said, our battle is for freedom. Our battle is not for few economic and political gains. Our battle is for the reclamation of human personality, which has been suppressed and mutilated by this Brahminical social order. This is what he says. He says that my battle, basically, or our battle, is not just for political rights or some kind of economic benefits. He says that our battle is for freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from these orthodox chains of, in fact, say what you call violations of human rights, and in the name of, in fact, like in the tradition and religion, he wants, in fact, breaking away the shackles, breaking away the thraldom upon which, in fact, it has been become a yoke on the necks of the millions, teeming millions of majority Bahujans of this country. Ambedkar says that our battle is for freedom. Our battle is not for few economic and political gains. He says our battle is for reclamation of human personality. This is a very, very, like, in a sense, what do you call a very, very high sounding word. To claim for something means you don't have it before and you want it right now. But what do we mean by reclamation? He says that the society has the claim of human dignity at one sort of a time in the history. He says that the cultural moorings of India, where we have a proto-democratic Ganas and where we have a democratic civilization called as Indus, where we don't have that time, in fact, now we don't have the caste and varnas over there. So he says that there was the human dignity and human personality was honored that time. So he says that our battle is for the reclamation of human personality, which has been suppressed and mutilated by this Brahminical social order. So therefore, friends, we see that the range of Ambedkar's human rights is very vast. His range of his human rights movement is to elevate the oppressed majority from subhuman level to the highest human level. This has been the great range that Ambedkar has set forth in the realm of human rights. Actually, he called for the responsibility of citizens to defend their rights. That's why he says, I quote, "I want an assurance of another kind. It is an assurance of strength, unity, and determination to stand for the rights, fight for our rights, and never to return until we win our rights." Unquote. He was just exhorting us and people that you need to understand those rights, stand for the realization of the rights, and never return, never to relax until the rights are won and implemented. So, friends, thus we see Ambedkar holding up a universal, moral, ethical relativism in order to tackle the unjust and inhuman institutions and traditions. He was opposing this cultural relativist position, actually, which has been there, this kind of a sort of discourse in anthropology of human rights, where cultural relativism has become problematic in tolerance of, in fact, now several violations of human rights. And Ambedkar says it is not just having an ethical relativism, but it should be a moral relativism, actually. A universal ethical moral relativism has been, in fact, now the position of Ambedkar in the area of human rights. And friends, Ambedkar's conviction is unparalleled. He said once, I could see his commitment actually to the cause. He said once, I quote, "If I fail to do away with the abominable thraldom and inhuman justice under which the class I was born, and it has been groaning, I will put an end to my life with a bullet." He says that if I'm unable to achieve rights and justice to the people of this society, inhuman society, unequal society, Ambedkar says, he takes a vow, I will put an end to my life with a bullet. That has been the courage of conviction. That has been, in fact, the intensity of his commitment to the society. Friends, Ambedkar's words and deeds rocked the traditionalists, and his rebellion had the promise to usher in a new era. His revolution was peaceful and for peace. It was for equality and social justice. Indeed, it was for an epoch making. He would ever be remembered in human history as an unflagging and undaunted revolutionary, noble liberator, and a pathfinder for all those who strive for revolutionary ethos and free spirit of humans. Thank you very much for the opportunity that you have given. And yes, participants, if you have any kind of a clarification or any kind of a criticism or any kind of a doubt or some suggestion, you're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Satyapal, sir, for your valuable presentation on Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and on human rights and and cultural relativism and moral versus ethical relativism. And yeah, dear participants, if you have any questions, please ask the speaker. It is interesting that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar made a statement that he, the law, don't think that the law will give you a protection or offering of the rights, but you have to have a, you have to fight for your rights, kind of thing. So, and also the other important word you mentioned is the laws are protected and provided by the social and moral conscience of the society, of the people. So would you please elaborate a little on that?
Yeah, this is in fact now with regard to the practicability of the legal instruments that have been say very carefully been enshrined in the constitution. So Ambedkar very pretty clearly knows that it is one thing to have a law and another thing to establish the application of that law, especially in a country like India. That's the reason why he gave several kind of warnings also. He says that in the third reading of the Constitution before the Constituent Assembly, he said, today India is being governed by two ideologies. The ideology enshrined in the preamble of the Constitution promises a life of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But the ideology that the people follow in their daily life denies those, the life of the such life which has been promised in the preamble. That means it is not just, in fact, no, you have a law, but you must see that the law is honored, recognized, and practiced by the people. Actually, there comes the real kind of a problem in India. Why? Because the human right violations in this country are not just, in fact, no kind of a what do you call, they are mere violations. They are just in a stray violations. They are not simply, in fact, no, a naked exercise or naked exhibition of power. The violations, in fact, no, have been supported very strangely in India by the sanction of religion, actually. So the religion which shapes up the social and moral conscience in this particular society, that gives the strength, that gives the, in fact, no, like a fertile, kind of a what do you call, boost up to these violations. Because the perpetrators of violence or the perpetrators of inequality do not feel that they are doing some kind of a transgression, do not feel that they are doing something which is against the humanity. They feel that they are bounded by the pious duty of the religion to behave in such a way. That's the problem, actually, which Ambedkar has brought out. He says that to practice inequalities of caste, to practice, in fact, no inhumanities in the name of caste, people feel, and people never rationalize themselves. So they are caught up in this vortex of, like, in a sense, unequal social order, where if one person at any given point, if that person doesn't respect those who are above, and in fact no despise those who are below, his own status, in fact, no, will not be ensured. So therefore, in order to keep up his own status, he will have to necessarily, like, look down upon others. That is a kind of a psychological kind of a frame which brings in, actually. That's why Ambedkar says that the everybody wants to see somebody below them, actually. That means the perpetration of inequality, the urge to like, in a sense, see somebody below them, has been, in fact, no, an institutional kind of an organized setup which has been there in the psyche of the people through enculturation, and which has been thoroughly defended by the religious dictum, where they feel that God has made this caste and I'm just following the kind of what do you call, varnashrama dharma that God has given to me. So this has been thoroughly problematic in India, actually. So therefore, Ambedkar was saying, just because you have a laws over there, your rights are not protected by the law. He says they are protected, your rights are protected by the social and moral conscience. That means the people have to be instilled that social consciousness, that everybody is equal. We need to have a unified civic society, not multitudes of societies named on caste. That's the reason why Ambedkar says we don't have a civic society in this country. Everybody, like, in a sense, belongs to a caste and feels that he or she is a member of that caste. So that's the point, actually, which he makes. You need to bring out a kind of a social consciousness and a moral consciousness. It requires, in fact, no rationalization, reason before doing anything and all. Is it moral? And what sort of a morality, actually? That morality basically is, but like, in a sense, envisages good for the whole, or is only good for the caste. So this sort of a consciousness has to be built up. Without that, that's what he says. The moral, consciousness, in fact, no, it is not a natural, feeling in this country. We talked about this particular aspect when we dealt with constitutional morality. Ambedkar says morality is not a natural sentiment in Indian soil. It has to be consciously cultivated. So therefore, unless this kind of a civic kind of a education is given to the people, Unfortunately, it is not given us, even in our education system. Our pedagogy never talks about that. Our civic, studies, they don't talk about caste as a problematic. They don't talk, in fact, no, patriarchy as a problematic thing. Our civic studies, social studies, and civic, sense only talks about, in fact, no, being hygienic. Only talks about, in fact, no, talks about the duties of a person actually. So it doesn't talk about the real problems of this country. Unless it is not there, probably, like, in a sense, it requires lots of efforts by the human rights movementators to create those social and moral conscience in the minds of India. Unfortunately, that sort of an effort nowadays, in fact, no, has been, in fact, no, a summer sapling. So those social and moral conscience, and, in fact, no, rationalizing the activities of one, even though we are in the 21st century, the prospects, in fact, now are appearing very, very difficult. So it's day by day becoming very, very difficult for the human rights movementators to establish that kind of a civic society uh, in this country. Yeah, it has to be consciously developed. Yeah. Seems that Dr. Rita is not there. Friends, if you have any other things like Mr. Shankaran, Dr. Govindaya, or Dr. Pragya, if you have anything to, like, in a sense of.
I'm sorry I joined bit delayed, and sorry I couldn't follow entire lecture. But
Yes.
after joining onwards, I'm really keenly listening to your lecture. Maybe I don't know how to put it in Ambedkar ideology and the relativism to relating to our modern education system in India now. Maybe
Yes,
when
sir.
we relate this, how this influence of education in the NEP 2020, the way how we relate this the policies which is really coming up in the modern society now. Can you give some little light on this?
That's a really, in fact, now a question which requires a lot of elaboration. The national education policy by itself, in fact, now, to me, it takes away rather than giving anything, actually. Because it has lots of issues, like, in a sense. If you look into that preamble of that particular thing, actually, so many lofty kind of words. I have talked to those members of the committee there, of course, not to Kasturi Rangan, but other members who are there as just tutelar figures, actually. So they talk about 21st century knowledge systems, at the same time couched in the traditional Indian Sanskritic knowledge systems and all. So I don't know the kind of a feat that they are going to do. I pretty well
That's what
knew.
Indian knowledge system. So
They
how this
say that
Indian knowledge system? Yeah.
that's right. Later on in the chapters inside, they meant, in fact, no, Sanskrit knowledge systems need to be premised, and they have to be, like, in a sense, a compulsory part of the syllabi. That has been an indication, actually, there. So what I see is, like, yes, the system of education, in fact, no, the public education has now been curtailed. That's what we see. The NEP says that down the line, 25, 30 years from now, 50% of those people who get education, that should come only from distance mode education and then online education. So that means we know the quality of distance and then online education. And by making it commercialized, so commercialized, that's the reason why we find so many academic shops coming up, like in the name of Baiju classes, Unacademy, and I know many such things would proliferate in the near future, maybe probably down the year or two. So that is one thing where, and the avenues of public education, direct, in fact, no, education are now being closed down. See, like, in a sense, universities and degree colleges, they are to be rationalized, going by the NEP, actually, and they all have to be converted to higher education institutions. So the 39,000 degree colleges that you have, they will be rationalized, downsized by few, and universities also, like in a sense, would be downsized. And we now see the common entrances, national common entrances, to enter into a kind of a like in a sense university course. That all these basically, like in a sense, they are to restrict and filter out many people out of this kind of a direct classroom education. Actually, that is one, and that's the reason why there is a lot of promotion for. So therefore, I see that there is imparting education to train the majority, like in a sense, oppressed communities as hands through this NEP, and only few entrenched, few, in fact, no, like in a sense, say sections of the society, to train those people as the, like in a sense, managers. So there is a differential kind of education being given. And with regard to quality of education, I would rather say that teachers would now be replaced by teacher counselors in the schools. And we know pretty well what it says. The teacher counselor shall be drawn from philanthropically oriented individuals and institutions. We know what institutions though they would be philanthropically oriented. They want to, in fact, now legally bring in their social service organizations as teachers in the schools. And with regard to the quality of teaching in the higher education institutions, the NEP talks very loftily. They say that committed, competent, like teachers in the universities. But if you go down to that clause 15.1, it says that all research entrants are stipulated to teach mandatory 6 hours per week. So that means all research scholars who join as research scholars for research, they have to take 6 classes per a week. So you can understand what sort of a quality of education that comes out. So therefore, I can talk about many things actually. So this new education policy does not talk about, in fact, no, the scholarships, post metric scholarships actually. Before this 2019, there was 2016 NEP, which of course, in fact, now is brought in by the same government, which is now in power. There was a kind of a proposal saying that 3 crore 30 lakhs. They said 33 million post metric scholarships are there for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, OBCs, and other kind of minorities. So they have proposed to bring down these scholarships from 33 million to just 2 million. That is to 20 lakhs actually. Wherein among the 20 lakhs, they said 10 lakh scholarships would go for economically weaker sections, which of course, in fact, now is being debated in the Supreme Court, which of course goes beyond the pale of the constitutional provision. So therefore, at least 2016 NEP draft talked about downsizing those things, but the 2019 NEP was very silent on this, saying that we don't provide any, but they say, it says that if the higher education institutions, they want to create the scholarships from their own financial pool, they can do so. So that means, in fact, now government completely washing up its hands of supporting the majority of the people in this country, the majority of the socially and educationally backward classes, like in a sense, the support that they get from to get into the portals of education. So this is like in a sense, there are many things which we can talk about NEP. That's what I just said. It takes away rather than giving us many. So there are a lot many things, like in a sense, there is commercialization of education, legalizing, in fact, now private, what you call many things, in fact, now even saffronization of education. Like it on the one side, it says it will equip the student for 21st century kind of a thing, but I think so it like in a sense doesn't give any kind of a democratic fillip in the so-called 21st century actually.
Yeah, they're making globalized economy. They try to bring the
yes, sir. The bright side is,
thank you so much.
Yeah, the bright side is, in fact, no, the kind of a, what do you call verbose of many lofty things. So somebody, in fact, now wrote it like a very kind of a, what do you call, uh, great speech, but what it delivers, in fact, now is otherwise. Yeah, thank you. And people of this
Thank you so
country, in
much,
fact,
sir.
now without proper education, so-called educated, in fact, no, they don't bother for constitution actually. See, that's the another problem with India. Like in a sense, that is the reason why Ambedkar said there is a difference between literate and an educated. See, he said in Indian context, literates are those who get their degrees, and then there is these things. But illiterate is all the way different from educated. He says educated are those who understand the problems of this society and take up the responsibility to mitigate those problems. So unfortunately, those literates in this country probably would never have seen the constitution, because this is a democracy where people have given the constitution themselves and they have to make the constitution work, because democracy doesn't work on its own. But unfortunately, even this tiny section of the educated do not care for such. So therefore, lot to be done, lot to be sensitized actually. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Such an elaborated explanation. Thank you. I'm
Thank you,
really
sir. Yeah.
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening, sir. I'm Shankaran here, sir.
Yes, Shankaran, yes. I can hear you. Please.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is regarding actually, as you have told about academic shops. Actually,
Yeah.
you had spoken about academic shops like Byju's and all things.
Yes, very much. Yeah.
I'm actually reading about that. Actually, I'm reading about that. Actually, I want to pose it as my topic in education anthropology in my PhD. Actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so we
That's
call
fine,
it a
yeah.
shadow education. That's what I have come to know about it, sir. But can we use the same word called shadow education in the present day scenario where we have what we say the common filtering examination and all these? Because Ambedkar sir used to say about the idea that merit is not an important thing. Actually, merit is not an important thing.
Yeah, that's right. Can I go?
Yes, sir.
See, education, if you take education, basically, like in a sense, pretty well, education has been, in fact, now, a secret code in Indian society for over centuries, actually. So imparting education to us, all the people has been problematic in this country. So if you look into the history, whenever education is given to all, you see historically India progressed actually. Taking back from Indus Valley civilization, when literacy was known to all, at least in fact, no, by whatever that we get in the archaeological and then some other kinds of evidences, there was flourishing of economy, and then there was foreign trade. Then coming to, in fact, no, the area when the ceramic traditions like Jains and Buddhisms, they brought education to all. There was, in fact, no, a kind of a say blooming up of, in fact, no, of certain kind of human aspects in the society. Buddhists, they did promote trade, foreign trade as well. And then during the Emperor Ashoka, again, I'm sorry, when education has been imparted through viharas and then universities, yes, people, in fact, got access, and there was economic flourishment actually. So whenever education has been given, I can go on, in fact, now, with this the kind of the kind of a couching up of history, and then bringing education to all people, and then of course it's a positive effects on the society. There's no, like, it's not a secret. It's not a secret, in fact, no. If you give education and skills to the population, naturally they'll get skilled, and there will be a lot of economic output actually. That is as simple as that particular. But unfortunately, in a kind of a, what do you call, educational kind, like in a sense, responsibility, when it has been given to the governments as a responsibility through constitution, even if you look into, I think so, we discussed this sometime before, that Dr. Ambedkar was very keen in imparting education to all. So in the draft constitution, he has kept right to education as a fundamental right in Article 23 of the draft constitution, and free and compulsory education from up to 14 years actually. But we know pretty well the draft constitutional subcommittee headed by Sardar Patel, they denied both. They said they were using the same kind of a logic. The government may not have enough monies to support, in fact, no, like uh, free education for all, right to education for all. That was the lame cost which was given in way back in 1947, and it is now being parroted even today. And they asked, in fact, no, not up to 14 years, but up to 11 years. Ambedkar had to fight very valiantly in the Constituent Assembly debates. He said 11 to 14 years. He said these are the crucial age where a majority of the children, they end up in farms or factories as child labor. So ultimately, as a kind of this thing, 14 years was given, but right to education as a fundamental right was denied by the Constituent Assembly. Ambedkar had to again fight to see that it is brought into the directive principles of state policy as Article 45. And Ambedkar was so vehement on that, he has kept Article 45 as the only clause in the whole of the Constitution which has a temporal time frame. It says that within 10 years of the promulgation of the Constitution, all children up to the age of 14 should get free and compulsory education. But time and again, like in a sense, if you go, you look into the educational imparting education, governments after governments, they failed actually, and they consciously, in fact, did not impart education. That is the reason why every 10 years, basically, when there is an assessment, 1950, that means by 1960, they should have been compulsory free education to all children. But 1963, Kothari Commission came and found out that such thing has not been there, and Kothari Commission has postponed this to another 10 years. He said by 1970s. Then you will see Operation Blackboard, then education policies who came later on, Sarva Shiksha Abhiyans and their targets. You will see, in fact, no, there is a thorough, blatant postponement of these targets. Never realized. Never, in fact, no, like in a sense, no government took it as a matter of important responsibility to educate the future children actually. So, like now, probably in 2012, the then government, in fact, no, gave education as a matter of right, as a fundamental right under Article 21. But when people have asked the then education minister, who is HR minister, Kapil Sibal, that time, when people asked, when are you going to, what are your targets to fulfill this? Kapil Sibal very cleverly said, when it has been turned into, education has been turned into a fundamental right, it is for the people to see that their fundamental right is fulfilled. It is not the government, in fact, no, to set up targets. So that was the reply that has been given, and we know what is the fate thereafter. So my point basically is, as Leo Tolstoy said, the governments, they appear that they are educating people, but all the governments, in fact, no, they thrive on the ignorance of the people. So which we very clearly see as a kind of a dictum even today. And that's why Noam Chomsky, the American, in fact, now Democrat, says they're not building schools and colleges. They're not building societies. They're building only the malls. They're not building training citizens. They're building only consumers actually. So these are all really, in fact, no, very, very incisive kind of exposition of what's happening actually. So yes, within the realm of education, you can bring in lot actually. That's a huge area where we have just built up only schools and infrastructure and all. We could not create that kind of an ecology of that kind of in fact ecosystem of education in this country. So that's the reason why you have scheme after scheme, names after names, in fact, no, of several schemes coming up, very, very fancy kind of a names. When the government changes, new scheme comes up. So yeah, education, in fact, no, is a very, very what do you call a story of, in fact, no, failed promises in this country. But education is very, very important for bringing up and putting up a what do you call a responsible citizenry. to create a citizen society, a civil society. So yeah, we
Thank
can
you,
deal a
sir.
lot about it. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Really, such an elaborate explanation, sir. Really.
I'm sorry, like probably maybe like in a sense I'm going too much into it. But
No,
anyway, you
sir, don't
prompted
say
me. Yeah.
sorry, sir. Don't say sorry. It's so
Yeah.
enlightening, sir. So enlightening.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. So Dr. Vedarataya, again, I see he's not there. So friends, shall we agree to like end this session?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no more these things, I immensely thank you for your participation and attention. And yeah, this is the 12th kind of a lecture in the course of 14 lectures. We have 2 more actually. Yeah. See you in the next kind of a topic. Thank you very much and good night.
Thank you.